So we're going to take a moment to speak about the concept of using leverage or using a lever, especially a long lever, and connecting lever to fixed point or lever to fulcrum, or however you want to term this. Now in this case, what we'll do is we have a patient in prone, and we're going to use the leg as a lever. We're going to be working in the area of the greater trochanter. We can move into the lumbar region should we need to. But the basic concept is that when using a long lever, you want to have some form of monitor at the area you're trying to move. Now, in most situations, we would expect to see something along the lines of a monitoring hand, right? So if I'm in the area of the greater trochanter, you won't necessarily be able to see my hand because of the angle of the camera, but my hand is going to monitor the greater trochanter. Is the hand the only way to monitor? No. You can also monitor with your eyes, right? Now, if I want the greater trochanter to move, or if I want the femur to move in relation to a relatively fixed pelvis, I can use my eyes. Now, if the patient's back's moving, I know that I've gone past the area that I'm aiming to move. If I use my hand and my eyes, right, I can be broadly looking in the area. What's the cue for change or connecting lever to fulcrum with my hand? The cue for connecting lever to fulcrum with my hand is whatever it feels like when I put my hand there. When I use the lever, I'm going to note a change in the tissue tension or in motion of the structure itself, motion of the bony structure. Now, if I'm going direct, that's going to be an increase in tension of the structure I'm trying to connect the lever to fixed point with. If I'm going indirect, I'm going to look for that tissue to soften, whether I need to go, with compression, traction, whatever I have to do. What I'm looking for if I'm going indirect is ease or reduction in tension in the tissue surrounding the area I'm working on. If I'm going direct, I'm looking at increase in tension. So the cues to identify if you are connecting lever to fulcrum properly are visual, right? So if I'm trying to get the greater trochanter to move, or if I'm trying to get the femur to move in relation to a relatively still pelvis, I use a broad visual field to see if I keep it there. If the pelvis rocks, I've gone too far. If I'm using just my hand, then I can look away, and what I'm doing is I'm just trying to feel changes in tension in the area. If I want to use vision and palpation, which I would suggest you do, which is why I've created the heuristic of keep your hands and your eyes on the prize to refer to multisensory integration, or using more than one sense to identify what you're trying to do or what you are doing, I would say use your hands, look for that change in tissue tension in the region that you're working, or look for the bony motion in the area that you're working, as well as the visual, so that other things aren't moving excessively. Other things will move to some degree. Now, if we want to take this, and instead of working on the relatively still pelvis, we want to work in the lumbar region, I can use the same leverage, right, as we've showed you before. Visually, I can identify if I'm moving some vertebral elements by rocking the pelvis. If I'm rocking the pelvis, I'm moving some vertebral element. If I put my hand in the region of the vertebral column, right, so broad contact for multi-point discrimination, I get as much as you can touch. I'm touching a large area to identify the structure that I want to find, as well as to identify what's happening there. So I'm going to use my eyes and my hand. Keep your hands and your eyes on the prize. And I'm going to be looking for changes in either the bony structure, the visual cues of motion, or in the soft tissue tension. If I'm going indirect, I want it to soften. If I'm going direct, I want it to tighten, right? I want some change in what I've identified initially. If I wanted to use the lever in a different way, right? So if you see the way I'm holding here, lots of contact with the patient's femur against my body, right? I can use the long lever essentially to create lateral flexion, side bending, whatever term you like, right? I can use compression, traction in a relative sense. I've got all these options, but the thing that we're really focusing on is connecting the lever, right, to the area that I want to move. And we use those visual cues, and we use those palpatory cues in combination. Right, so you've got some visual sense of what I'm talking about. You have some verbal sense of what I'm talking about. Now, if we look at a shorter lever, the same thing applies, right? I'm going to use my eyes and my hands. Let's just say I want to create motion. I want to use the sacrum as the initiation of my lever, and I want to work in the lumbar column. My hand broadly contacts the lumbar column, and I can use the sacrum to mobilize, right? So we would call this oscillation, or some people call this oscillation. In a relative sense, it's a shorter lever or a medium lever approach, right? But I just use my eyes. Right now, I'm going to see some auxiliary motion because I'm using oscillation, or I can just create smaller motions. But I'm going to use my eyes to look for the motion in the region that I'm aiming for and not past it. I'm going to use my hand to identify either softening or tightening of soft tissues in the area, and I'm going to use my hand to identify bony motion, right? I can also just go straight onto a bone and just lean on it. I'm going to use my eyes again, I'm going to use my hand. All of these things keep playing. So the concept of multisensory integration, or the heuristic of keep your hands and your eyes on the prize, allows you to figure out when you have actually connected lever and fulcrum. So make sure that you're using as many of your senses as you can. The two primary ones with respect to connecting lever and fulcrum are your eyes and your hands. And the visual cue is motion in the area that you're hoping for, with minimal or no motion where you're not hoping for it. And the soft tissue cue, if you're going direct, it's increased tone or tension in the area that you're working. If you're going indirect, it's decreased tension in that soft tissue. Regardless of direct or indirect, if you're paying attention to the bony structure, it will just be some form of motion in the bony structure as long as you have it under appropriate palpation.